Patricia Winters stood frozen on her back patio, coffee mug suspended midway in her lips as she watched a middle-aged woman in a floral one-piece swimsuit and designer sunglasses lower herself into Patricia's swimming pool. "Excuse me," Patricia called out, certain there must be some mistake. The stranger was now fully submerged to her shoulders, her blonde highlighted bob remaining perfectly dry as she tilted her head back in apparent bliss. The woman's eyes snapped open behind her oversized sunglasses. "Oh, you startled me." She spoke with the casual confidence of someone who belonged exactly where they were. "I'm Karen Livingston, the new HOA president." She extended a manicured hand, which Patricia didn't move to shake. "I'm conducting pool inspections today." "Pool inspections," Patricia repeated, setting down her coffee mug with deliberate calm. "Yes," Karen explained, now swimming a leisurely backstroke. "It's my responsibility to ensure all amenities comply with neighborhood standards. You know, chlorine levels, temperature control, safety features." She gestured vaguely around the pool that Patricia had installed just 3 months ago. Patricia felt her cheeks flush. "You can't just enter someone's property and—" "Actually, I can," Karen interrupted, reaching for a towel she draped over Patricia's lounge chair. Section 8, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that board members may inspect exterior property features with reasonable notice. "I'd received no notice," Patricia said flatly. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "I sent an email to all residents last night at 11:45 p.m. Not my fault that you don't check your inbox regularly." She wrapped the towel around herself and stepped onto the patio. "Anyway, your water temperature is approximately 2 degrees above regulation. You'll need to adjust that by tomorrow." Patricia blinked in disbelief. "This is private property, my private pool." Within an HOA-governed community, Karen corrected, raining water from her hair onto Patricia's patio stones. Nothing is truly private when community standards are at stake. She pulled a small notebook from her beach bag and began writing. "I'm also noting that your patio furniture doesn't match the approved color palette. You'll need to replace these by next weekend or face a fine." Patricia watched in stunned silence as Karen gathered her things and walked through the side gate as if she owned the place. Only after the gate clicked shut did Patricia recover enough to move. She lunged for her phone and dialed her husband. "David, you won't believe what just happened," she hissed. "Some woman from the HOA just used our pool like it was a community facility." David's laugh came through the speaker. "Come on, you're exaggerating." "I am not. She called it a pool inspection and then told me our patio furniture violates HOA rules." "What patio furniture rules? We've lived here for 5 years without issue." Patricia took a deep breath. Apparently there's a new HOA president. "Karen something." "Oh God," David groaned. "Mrs. Alvarez warned me about her when she moved in last month. Said she single-handedly terrorized her previous neighborhood into submission." "Well, she's not intimidating me," Patricia declared. "This is absolutely insane." What neither of them realized was that Karen Livingston's impromptu pool inspection was only the opening salvo in what would become a neighborhood war that would change their community forever. Karen Livingston had been HOA president for exactly 16 days, and already the Oak Ridge Estates community message board was ablaze with complaints. She had issued 27 violation notices in her first week alone, covering everything from excessive holiday decorations in April to non-regulation mailbox heights, measured down to the quarter-inch. On this particular Tuesday morning, Karen stood in her immaculate kitchen, sipping her precisely 145-degree green tea while crafting her latest community email. Her husband, Gerald, a quiet man who had perfected the art of invisibility during their 20-year marriage, silently read his newspaper at the breakfast counter. "Listen to this, Gerald," Karen said, not looking up from her tablet. "It has come to the board's attention that several residents are displaying unauthorized wind chimes. Effective immediately, all auditory decorations must be approved by the Aesthetic Harmony Committee." She looked up. "That's me. I'm the committee." Gerald murmured something non-committal without lowering his newspaper. "I'm also implementing mandatory lawn inspections on Wednesdays," Karen continued, tapping away. "I've noticed at least 7 yards with grass exceeding the 4-inch regulation." "Do we have a 4-inch regulation?" Gerald asked mildly. Karen's fingers paused over her tablet. "We do now." After sending her email, Karen donned her inspection outfit, khaki shorts, a polo shirt with HOA enforcement embroidered on the breast, a custom order she paid for herself, and a wide-brimmed hat. She clipped a tape measure to her belt, alongside her digital camera for documenting violations. Her first stop was the Wilson residence, where a 10-year-old boy was selling lemonade from a folding table. "Permit?" Karen demanded, approaching with her tablet ready. The boy looked up with confusion. "Huh. Do you have a permit for this commercial enterprise? And a food handler's license?" The boy's mother appeared from inside the house. "He's just selling lemonade, Karen." It's for his school fundraiser. Commercial activities require board approval, Stephanie, Karen replied, already typing. That'll be a $50 fine, plus immediate cessation of operations. It's lemonade, Stephanie said incredulously. He's 10. Rules are rules, Karen replied without looking up. Oh, and your garden gnome exceeds the 12-inch decorative item height limitation. That's another $25. As Karen continued her patrol, she spotted Patricia Winters walking her golden retriever. Karen immediately changed direction to intercept. Your dog just urinated on the Johnsons' lawn, Karen called out. Section 12 clearly prohibits pet waste on communal or private lawns. Patricia stared at her. Urination isn't waste, Karen, and I always clean up after him. Karen's nostrils flared, liquid or solid. It's all waste. That'll be a $75 fine. I'm not paying that, Patricia said flatly. Then I'll add it to your monthly assessment, Karen replied with a thin smile, along with the pool temperature violation you still haven't addressed. Patricia stepped closer. You know what, Karen? You've issued more violations in 2 weeks than the previous board did in 2 years. People are talking. Good, Karen said, straightening her shoulders. It means they're finally paying attention to standards that have been woefully ignored. What Karen didn't mention was that enforcing rules gave her the only sense of control she felt since being passed over for partnership at her law firm 3 months ago, a humiliation that had prompted their move to Oak Ridge Estates in the first place. As she walked away from Patricia, Karen's phone pinged with a message from the community board treasurer. Emergency meeting requested by multiple residents. Thursday, 7 p.m. Karen smiled. Perfect. She'd been looking for an opportunity to introduce her new comprehensive 45-page rulebook. The community center buzzed with tension as nearly 60 residents, a record turnout, filed in for the emergency HOA meeting. Karen sat alone at the front table, meticulously arranging her binder, laptop, and gavel, purchased with her personal funds but logged as an HOA expense. The other 4 board members sat slightly apart, already showing signs of the division Karen had strategically cultivated. Let's bring this meeting to order, Karen announced, striking her gavel with unnecessary force. Before addressing resident concerns, I'll present the new Enhanced Community Standards document I prepared. Patricia Winters stood up immediately. Point of order. This emergency meeting was called specifically to address concerns about your leadership approach, not to introduce new regulations. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened around the gavel. As president, I determine the agenda, she replied coldly. However, I'm happy to address any misunderstandings after my presentation. For the next 40 minutes, Karen detailed her vision for Oak Ridge Estates, standardized mailboxes available through her recommended vendor at a special community rate, approved plant lists categorized by yard zone, and a color-coded violation system with escalating fines. Furthermore, Karen continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing restlessness, I propose weekly property inspections conducted by a committee of qualified residents. She paused, which, given my background in contract law, I am uniquely qualified to chair. David Winters finally stood up. Karen, in the 3 weeks since you became president, property values haven't increased, but neighbor relations have deteriorated dramatically. The HOA exists to maintain community standards, not to micromanage our lives. Applause broke out, and Karen's practiced smile faltered momentarily. I've merely been enforcing existing bylaws. No, interrupted Eleanor Johnson, an 82-year-old community founding member. You've been interpreting vague bylaws in the most restrictive way possible. My bird feeder has been up for 12 years without issue until your decorative feeding station prohibition last week. Karen cleared her throat. Perhaps some of you have grown accustomed to lax enforcement. Or perhaps, Patricia interjected, you're overcompensating for something. Tell me, Karen, does it bother you that your last HOA board asked you to resign? The room went silent. Karen's face drained of color. That's private information, she stammered. Patricia held up her phone. Not according to the public minutes from Willow Creek Estates. They cited abuse of power and creating a hostile community environment as reasons for requesting your resignation. What followed was precisely what Karen had feared since moving to Oak Ridge, a complete loss of control. Residents shared stories of petty fines, arbitrary rule interpretations, and Karen's trespassing incidents, including the now infamous pool inspection. As the meeting devolved into a public referendum on her leadership, something unexpected happened inside Karen. Instead of doubling down, she felt a strange hollowness. The satisfaction she usually derived from rule enforcement evaporated as she faced a roomful of people who clearly despised her. When the vote of no confidence was proposed, Karen surprised everyone by speaking quietly. Perhaps I've been overzealous in my approach, she conceded, the words physically painful to utter. I moved here wanting to contribute to maintaining the community's standards. Maybe I've gone about it the wrong way. The room fell silent again, this unexpected vulnerability creating momentary confusion. Board member Michael Chen seized the opportunity. I propose we table the no-confidence vote and instead create a bylaws review committee to clarify and modernize our regulations with input from all community segments. Karen nodded slowly, already calculating. She'd lost this battle, but the war wasn't over. If she couldn't rule through fear, perhaps another approach would work. And she knew exactly which neighbors to target first in her new strategy. Karen spent the weekend after the emergency meeting in uncharacteristic silence, barely leaving her house except to collect her mail and water her meticulously maintained front garden. Behind closed doors, however, her mind was racing, developing what she called Operation Community Restoration, her comprehensive plan to regain control. "You're taking this too personally," Gerald said on Sunday evening, watching her reorganize her HOA files for the third time. Karen looked up sharply. "When someone publicly humiliates you with half-truths and exaggerations, it is personal, Gerald." He sighed. "Karen, you did use their pool without permission. It was an inspection. You were swimming laps. I saw the pictures on the community board." Karen slammed her binder shut. "Whose side are you on?" "Yours, always yours," Gerald replied wearily. "But maybe consider that not everything needs to be controlled. We moved here for a fresh start, remember?" Karen turned away, unwilling to admit that her obsession with rules had followed the same pattern in their last 3 neighborhoods. Instead, she focused on phase 1 of her new strategy, divide and conquer. Monday morning, Karen appeared on Eleanor Johnson's doorstep with a homemade blueberry pie and a carefully rehearsed speech about respecting community elders. By Wednesday, she had personally apologized to 5 key community influencers, hosted a coffee and concerns gathering for young families, and volunteered to fund new playground equipment through a private donation, which she could later leverage when needed. Most surprisingly, she approached Patricia Winters directly, catching her in the local grocery store. "Patricia," Karen said, her voice carefully modulated to sound humble, "I owe you an apology. My behavior regarding your pool was inappropriate." Patricia's suspicion was evident. "That's unexpected." "I've been reflecting on my approach," Karen continued. "You were right to call me out. I'd like to make amends, perhaps by working together on the bylaws committee." Patricia studied Karen's face, searching for insincerity. Why the sudden change of heart? Karen had prepared for this question. "Losing my partnership at the firm was harder than I admitted, even to myself. I channeled that frustration into controlling what I could, this neighborhood." She allowed her voice to crack slightly. It wasn't fair to anyone. Whether Patricia believed her or not, social convention made it difficult to reject such a direct apology. They parted with a tentative agreement to discuss community improvements over coffee the following week. What Patricia didn't see was Karen's satisfied smile as she turned away. The famous Sun Tzu quote ran through Karen's mind. "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." By the next board meeting, Karen had transformed her approach entirely. She arrived in casual clothes instead of her enforcement uniform, spoke softly, and deferred to others repeatedly. She had privately met with each board member, finding their personal pressure points. Michael Chen's desire for basketball courts his teens could use, Sarah Miller's interest in community gardening, Tom Wallace's concern about parking regulations. "I've been thinking," Karen announced near the meeting's end, "that our current violation fine system is unnecessarily punitive. Perhaps we should consider a warning system first, with community service options instead of monetary penalties." The board members exchanged surprised glances. This was not the Karen they had come to know. "That's actually a great idea," Michael said cautiously. Karen beamed. "Wonderful. I've drafted some preliminary guidelines, nothing formal, just ideas for discussion." She distributed folders containing meticulously prepared documents that, if implemented without careful reading, would ultimately give her discretionary power over which violations received warnings versus immediate fines. As the meeting concluded, board member Sarah Miller approached Karen. "This is a refreshing change. I honestly thought we have to force a resignation." Karen smiled warmly. "Sometimes we need a wake-up call. I'm just grateful for the second chance." What Karen didn't say was that each community improvement she now supported came with carefully embedded provisions that would ultimately expand the board's enforcement authority she intended to reclaim, one small concession at a time. Over the next 2 months, Oak Ridge Estates witnessed what many residents called the reformation of Karen. Gone was the clipboard-wielding tyrant, replaced by a seemingly thoughtful community advocate who brought homemade cookies to meetings and remembered residents' children's names. She initiated a neighborhood beautification project, personally contributing to new flower beds around the community center. "I don't trust it," Patricia confided to her husband as they watched Karen planting petunias with several neighborhood children one Saturday morning. "Nobody changes that completely," David shrugged. "Maybe the community pushback was the wake-up call she needed. Or maybe she's playing a longer game," Patricia muttered. Indeed, beneath Karen's newfound community spirit lay a carefully constructed strategy. Each seemingly generous initiative came with strings that only became visible upon close inspection. The new playground equipment she donated required additional rule modifications that incrementally expanded homeowner authority over common areas. The Bylaws Review Committee, which Karen had enthusiastically supported, now found itself guided by her helpful research and precedents from other communities. Her law background proved useful as she volunteered to draft language that, while appearing reasonable, contained subtle loopholes and enforcement mechanisms that only someone with legal training might notice. Even her social interactions were calculated. Karen had mapped the community's social network, identifying key influencers and potential allies. Mrs. Johnson, the respected community elder who had opposed her, now received regular visits where Karen listened attentively to stories about the neighborhood's history, carefully gathering information about long-standing property disputes and unresolved community tensions she could later exploit. Karen's most masterful move came during the July board meeting, where she announced, after reflection, "I believe our HOA presidency should rotate more frequently to prevent any single vision from dominating. I'd like to propose a bylaw amendment creating term limits, starting with my own position." The board members were stunned by this apparent surrender of power. "That's a surprisingly self-aware Karen," Michael Chen said. Karen smiled modestly. "I've learned a lot from all of you." What she didn't mention was that the amendment's fine print created a new advisory council of past presidents with significant procedural powers and designated the outgoing president as automatic chair of both the Violations Committee and Architectural Review Board, positions actually wielding more granular control than the presidency itself. After the meeting, Karen invited several board members to her home for wine and dessert, something unimaginable months earlier. As they relaxed on her impeccably decorated patio, she listened more than spoke, filing away personal details and vulnerabilities for future use. "Your daughter is graduating next year?" she asked Sarah Miller warmly. "That's wonderful. Is she considering State University? I have several contacts in admissions there from my previous firm." Later that evening, after everyone had left, Gerald found Karen in her home office, updating her community spreadsheet with new information. "You're really committed to this new approach," he observed, leaning against the doorframe. Karen didn't look up. "It's so much more effective. People voluntarily tell you everything you need to know when they think you care." Gerald studied his wife's face. "And do you care?" Karen paused, the question seeming to genuinely surprise her. "I care about creating an optimal community environment. That's not what I asked." Karen turned back to her spreadsheet without answering. The truth was more complicated than she cared to examine. The control still mattered, perhaps more than ever, but there was something unexpectedly satisfying about the social approval she now received. The community email board, once filled with complaints about her, now contained occasional praise. It felt good, in a way that simply enforcing rules never had. This confusing mixture of genuine connection and strategic manipulation left Karen increasingly uncertain where her true motivations began and ended, questions she preferred to leave unanswered as she continued methodically reconstructing her influence one neighborly gesture at a time. By October, Karen's transformation appeared complete. The neighborhood Halloween decoration contest she organized was a resounding success, with Karen herself declining to enter to avoid any appearance of favoritism. She had become a fixture at community events, always helpful, never pushy, the model of reformed behavior. Behind the scenes, however, her careful consolidation of influence continued. The committee restructuring she had proposed passed unanimously, giving her control over both architectural reviews and violations, the two committees with the most direct impact on residents' daily lives. On a crisp autumn morning, Karen sat across from Patricia at the local coffee shop, sipping lattes and discussing the upcoming holiday season preparations. "I'm thinking we could relax the decoration restrictions this year," Karen suggested. "Let people express their creativity a bit more." Patricia studied her cautiously. "That's generous, especially considering your previous stance." Karen smiled warmly. "People can change, Patricia." Their tentative friendship had developed slowly, with Patricia maintaining a watchful skepticism that Karen worked diligently to erode. Today's meeting had another purpose, however, one Patricia wasn't expecting. "I'd wanted to discuss something delicate," Karen said, lowering her voice. "The board is concerned about your pool house addition." Patricia's guard instantly rose. "What about it? We submitted all the required plans." "Yes, but there seems to be a discrepancy between the approved specifications and what's being constructed," Karen said regretfully, sliding a folder across the table. "The roof line appears to be 8 inches higher than permitted." "That's impossible," Patricia said, opening the folder to find photographs with measurement lines superimposed. "We're following the exact plans that were approved." Karen looked sympathetic. The Architectural Review Committee is willing to grant a variance, of course. We just need to document everything properly. You mean the committee that you now chair? Patricia asked pointedly. Karen's expression didn't change. I have recused myself from your case specifically to avoid any appearance of conflict. What Karen didn't mention was that she had privately instructed the committee members on which concerns to raise before her recusal. Patricia closed the folder firmly. Our contractor confirmed everything is to specification. If there's a discrepancy, it's in the review process, not our construction. Well, Karen said with a slight shrug, you'll have an opportunity to present your case at the violations hearing next week. I'm sure we'll all get sorted out. The conversation's temperature had dropped 20 degrees. As they parted ways, the fragile trust that had been building shattered completely. Patricia went straight home and pulled out their original plans, confirming they matched exactly what was being built. When she called the HOA office to request the official documents for comparison, she was told they were temporarily unavailable due to digital archiving. That evening, Patricia convened an emergency meeting with several neighbors who had also recently received surprising violations after months of Karen's apparent reformation. She's been playing us, Eleanor Johnson declared. All these committees and reorganizations, she has more actual power now than when she was just the president. Michael Chen nodded grimly. The playground she donated, the maintenance costs were quietly added to our annual assessments, with a clause giving the violations committee, which she now controls, authority over all common area usage rules. And the term limits she so generously proposed for herself, added Tom Wallace. They created that advisory council position with veto power over budget allocations. Patricia paced her living room. So while pretending to become more reasonable, she's actually been consolidating power through bureaucracy instead of bullying. It's actually brilliant, Michael admitted reluctantly. Much harder to fight against than her original approach. Patricia stopped pacing, unless we can prove what she's doing. Later that night, as Patricia was reviewing old meeting minutes, she received an unexpected text from an unknown number. Parking lot behind Westfield Mall. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Information about Karen you need to see. After a moment's hesitation, Patricia typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who knows her better than anyone. Ring your lawyer friend." Patricia stared at her phone, a chill running down her spine as she realized who the mysterious texter must be and what this meeting might reveal about the true extent of Karen's neighborhood machinations. The mall parking lot was nearly empty when Patricia arrived the next morning, accompanied by her friend Anita, a real estate attorney. They spotted a man sitting alone at Grace Sedan, shoulders hunched, eyes watchful. "That's him," Patricia said quietly. "Gerald Livingston, Karen's husband." Gerald nodded grimly as they approached. Instead of speaking, he handed Patricia a USB drive. "Everything's here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. All of her spreadsheets, the actual HOA documents before she modified them, emails, recordings of her planning sessions. 3 neighborhoods worth of the same pattern. Patricia stared at the small device. "Why are you doing this?" Gerald's gaze drifted to the distance. 23 years of marriage, every time we move, it's the same. Karen finds a community, takes over, creates chaos, makes enemies, then we move again when it becomes untenable. He rubbed his temples. "I can't do it anymore." Neither can she, though she won't admit it. "Why now?" Anita asked, lawyer instincts kicking in. "Last night, I'd overheard her on the phone with her old firm partner. They're considering taking her back if we relocate again." Gerald looked directly at Patricia. Another fresh start, another neighborhood to control. It never ends. Patricia glanced at the USB drive. "Is using this ethical?" "Everything on there is actually HOA property, not personal," Gerald replied. "Meeting recordings, official correspondence, bylaws before and after her amendments. I'm just restoring community access to documents that should have been public all along." After Gerald left, Patricia and Anita spent hours reviewing the files. The scope of Karen's manipulation was staggering. Systematic document alterations, selective enforcement targets, and a comprehensive influence map of every resident with potential leverage points noted. "This goes beyond HOA overreach," Anita said, scrolling through a particularly damning email chain. "There's actual fraud here. She's been altering official records and misrepresenting board decisions." Most disturbing was Karen's strategic prioritization matrix, a spreadsheet ranking neighbors by their usefulness or threat level, with Patricia at the top of the neutralized influence category. That evening, 12 key residents gathered in Patricia's living room to review the evidence. The collective shock gradually transformed into strategic determination. "We can't just expose her," Michael Chen cautioned. "She's too embedded in our committee structure now. We need to be as methodical in dismantling her system as she was in creating it." Eleanor Johnson, the community elder, spoke up. "You're thinking too complicated. Sometimes the simplest approach is best." The next morning, Karen was surprised to find Gerald had left early without saying goodbye. Unusual for him, but not concerning given their recent tension. She had no appointments until the afternoon violations committee meeting where Patricia Winter's pool house case would be reviewed. Karen spent the morning refining her strategy for the hearing, carefully constructing an approach that would appear reasonable while establishing a precedent for tighter construction oversight. At precisely 12:30, she gathered her materials and walked confidently to the community center. She pushed open the door to find not just the violations committee, but nearly 40 residents seated in rows. At the front table sat all 5 board members, with Patricia Winters standing at a podium. A projector displayed a familiar spreadsheet, Karen's own strategic matrix, with her notes about each resident visible to all. "What is this?" Karen demanded, her voice sharp with alarm. Board President Michael Chen, when had he become president, looked up calmly. "Emergency all-community meeting, Karen. Called under bylaw provision 5.3, which allows for immediate review of evidence suggesting procedural violations." "You can't," Karen began. "Actually, we can," Patricia interrupted. "Using the very amendments you added to strengthen the advisory council's authority. Ironic, isn't it?" For the next 30 minutes, the community methodically presented evidence from Gerald's USB drive, documenting the systematic way Karen had manipulated the HOA structure. Each revelation hit Karen like a physical blow, especially when her own detailed notes about exploiting neighbors' vulnerabilities were displayed on the large screen. When they showed the before and after versions of architectural guidelines she had altered without authorization, Karen finally found her voice. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted, desperation creeping into her tone. Gerald had no right to access HOA documents. "These weren't private files, Karen," Patricia said quietly. "They're community property, and Gerald simply returned them to their rightful owners." As the evidence mounted, Karen's carefully constructed facade crumbled. The community she had worked so methodically to control now stared at her with a mixture of anger and pity. "Where is Gerald?" she finally asked, suddenly aware of his absence. Michael Chen slid an envelope across the table. "He asked us to give you this." The letter inside was brief. "Karen, I've gone to stay with my brother. I can't do this again. When you're ready to live without needing to control everything around you, call me. Until then, I need distance." As Karen stared at her husband's handwriting, the true cost of her behavior suddenly crystallized with devastating clarity. 3 days after the emergency meeting, Karen's house stood silent, blinds drawn, her black Mercedes unmoved in the driveway. Neighbors had seen no activity, leading to whispered concerns about her well-being. It was Patricia who finally rang the doorbell, standing resolutely on the porch despite their complicated history. After the 3rd attempt, the door opened to reveal a disheveled Karen, a shocking contrast to her perpetually polished appearance. Her hair hung limp, her face bare of makeup, her clothing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants instead of her usual tailored attire. "Come to gloat?" Karen asked, her voice hollow. Patricia shook her head. "To check if you're all right. May I come in?" The house's interior reflected Karen's state, uncharacteristically disorganized with empty takeout containers and discarded tissues suggesting days of neglect. They sat awkwardly in the living room, the ghost of their conflict hanging between them. "The board voted yesterday," Patricia said finally. "They're implementing a complete organizational reset, new bylaws, simplified committee structure, term limits, transparent documentation." She paused. Gerald's evidence was comprehensive. Karen nodded vaguely, seemingly uninterested. "He's filing for separation." "I'm sorry," Patricia said, genuinely meaning it. 23 years, Karen murmured. "He always followed along, never complained. I thought he agreed with me." She looked directly at Patricia for the first time. "Why are you here? Really?" Patricia considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I'm trying to understand. This wasn't just about power, was it? There's something more." The question seemed to penetrate Karen's numbness. She stared at her hands for a long moment. "Control is predictable," she said finally. "When I was a child, everything was chaos. My parents fought constantly, moved us repeatedly. Rules changed daily depending on their moods." She took a shaky breath. "As an adult, I promised myself I'd never live in uncertainty again. Every community I've lived in, every job I've had, I need to establish order, create systems." "Even when those systems make people miserable?" Patricia asked gently. Karen's laugh was bitter, especially then. "When people resent you, their behavior becomes more predictable. Anger is easier to anticipate than friendship." She gestured vaguely around her empty house. Obviously, a flawed strategy in the long run. They talked for over an hour, the conversation gradually shifting from HOA politics to deeper reflections. Karen revealed her partnership rejection had triggered profound insecurity, while Patricia admitted the pool, which Karen had so invasively inspected, represented a financial stretch meant to create stability for her family during her husband's recent health scare. Eventually, Patricia stood to leave. The board meeting is tomorrow at 7. They'll be discussing transition plans. Karen nodded. I assume my resignation is expected? Actually, Patricia said carefully, there's been discussion of creating a documentation committee to reorganize our record-keeping systems. Your organizational skills are undeniably impressive when properly directed. Karen looked up, genuine surprise breaking through her apathy. Think about it, Patricia continued. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to repair what's broken rather than abandon it entirely. She paused at the door, not unlike marriages, neighborhoods, or careers. After Patricia left, Karen sat motionless for a long time. Finally, she moved to her office, where her community binders stood in perfect alignment. She pulled one out, her original neighborhood improvement proposals, before she had twisted them into control mechanisms. Some of the ideas had been genuinely good, thoughtful, potentially beneficial to everyone, not just for need for control. The next evening, the community center fell silent when Karen walked in, dressed simply but professionally, her expression composed but lacking its former imperious confidence. She took a seat in the back row, expecting hostility but receiving only watchful curiosity. When public comments opened, Karen approached the podium. I owe everyone an apology, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My behavior has been inexcusable, my methods manipulative, my motives selfish. She took a deep breath. I'm seeking professional help to address the underlying issues that drive my need for control. In the meantime, I prepared this. She placed a folder on the table, a comprehensive guide to identifying and reversing the procedural changes she had implemented, alongside her formal resignation from all committees. Additionally, she continued, I'd like to volunteer to assist with untangling the documentation issues I created under whatever supervision the board deems appropriate, not as a leader, but as a resident trying to make amends. The room remained silent after she returned to her seat. Board discussion resumed with occasional glances in her direction. Karen sat quietly, the familiar urge to control the situation washing over her. But for the first time in her adult life, she deliberately let it pass without action. After the meeting, as residents dispersed in conversational clusters, Karen walked alone to her car. A text message illuminated her phone screen. Coffee tomorrow? We should talk. Gerald. 6 months later, Karen stood in her front yard, supervising, but not controlling, a community tree planting project she had proposed as part of her rehabilitation efforts. Her relationship with Gerald remained complicated but healing, the twice-weekly counseling sessions gradually rebuilding trust. Patricia approached with 2 cups of lemonade. The documentation committee meeting is at 4. Still planning to attend? Karen nodded. With my strictly advisory role, of course. They had developed an unexpected friendship, Patricia's directness balancing Karen's detail orientation in a surprisingly effective partnership. The neighborhood had cautiously accepted Karen's genuine efforts at change, her expertise valuable when not wielded as a weapon.